Chapter 3, Part 2 of the Talisman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lizzie Driver. The Talisman by Sir Walter Scott. Chapter 3, Part 2. The light was now verging low, yet served the knight still to discern that they two were no longer alone in the desert, but were closely watched by a figure of great height and very thin, which skipped over rocks and bushes with so much agility as, added to the wild and hirsute appearance of the individual, reminded him of the fauns and sylvans whose images he had seen in the ancient temples of Rome. As the single-hearted Scottishman had never for a moment doubted these gods of the ancient Gentiles to be actually devils, so he now hesitated not to believe that the blasphemous hymn of the Saracen had raised up an infernal spirit. "But what recks it?" said stout Sir Kenneth to himself. "Down with the fiend and his worshippers!" He did not, however, think it necessary to give the same warning of defiance to two enemies as he would unquestionably have afforded to one. His hand was upon his mace, and perhaps the unwary Saracen would have paid for his Persian poetry by having his brains dashed out on the spot, without any reason assigned for it. But the Scottish knight was spared from committing what would have been a sore blot in his shield of arms. The apparition, on which his eyes had been fixed for some time, had at first appeared to dog their path by concealing itself behind rocks and shrubs, using those advantages of the ground with great address, and surmounting its irregularities with surprising agility. At length, just as the Saracen paused in his song, the figure, which was that of a tall man clothed in goatskins, sprung up into the midst of the path, and seized a rein of the Saracen's bridle in either hand, confronting thus and bearing back the noble horse, which, unable to endure the manner in which this sudden assailant pressed the long-armed bit, and the severe curb, which, according to the Eastern fashion, was a solid ring of iron, reared upright and finally fell backwards on his master, who, however, avoided the peril of the fall by lightly throwing himself to one side. The assailant then shifted his grasp from the bridle of the horse to the throat of the rider, flung himself above the struggling Saracen, and, despite of his youth and activity, kept him undermost, wreathing his long arms above those of his prisoner, who called out angrily, and yet half laughing at the same time, "Hamko, fool, unloose me! This passes thy privilege. Unloose me, or I will use my dagger." "Thy dagger, infidel dog!" said the figure in the goatskins. "Hold it in thy grip if thou canst." And in an instant he wrenched the Saracen's weapon out of its owner's hand, and brandished it over his head. "Help, Nazarene!" cried Sheerkohf, now seriously alarmed. "Help, or the Hamako will slay me." "Slay thee?" replied the dweller of the desert. "And well hast thou merited death, for singing thy blasphemous hymns, not only to the praise of thy false prophet, who is the foul fiend's harbinger, but to that of the author of evil himself." The Christian knight had hitherto looked on as one stupefied. So strangely had this rencounter contradicted, in its progress and event, all that he had previously conjectured. He felt, however, at length, that it touched his honour to interfere in behalf of his discomfited companion, and therefore addressed himself to the victorious figure in the goatskins. "Whosoever thou art," he said, "and whether of good or of evil, know that I am sworn from the time to be true companion to the Saracen whom thou holdest under thee. Therefore I pray thee to let him arise, else I will do battle with thee in his behalf." "And a proper quarrel it were," answered the Hamako, "for a Crusader to do battle in, for the sake of an unbaptized dog, to combat one of his own holy faith. Art thou come forth to the wilderness to fight for the crescent against the cross? A goodly soldier of God art thou to listen to those who sing the praises of Satan." Yet while he spoke thus, he arose himself, and, suffering the Saracen to rise also, returned to him his cangiar, or poniard. "Thou seest to what a point of peril thy presumption hath brought thee," continued he of the goatskins, now addressing Sheerkohf, "and by what weak means thy practised skill and boasted agility can be foiled, when such is Heaven's pleasure. Wherefore, beware, O Ilderim, for know that, were there not a twinkle in the star of thy nativity which promises for thee something that is good and gracious in Heaven's good time, we two had not parted till I had torn asunder the throat which so lately trilled forth blasphemies." "Hamako," said the Saracen, without any appearance of resenting the violent language and yet more violent assault to which he had been subjected, "I pray thee, good Hamako, to beware how thou dost again urge thy privilege over far; for though, as a good Moslem, I respect those whom Heaven hath deprived of ordinary reason, in order to endow them with the spirit of prophecy, yet I like not other men's hands on the bridle of my horse, neither upon my own person. Speak, therefore, what thou wilt, secure of any resentment from me, but gather so much sense as to apprehend that if thou shalt again proffer me any violence, I will strike thy shagged head from thy meagre shoulders. And to thee, friend Kenneth," he added, as he remounted his steed, "I must needs say, that in a companion through the desert, I love friendly deeds better than fair words. Of the last thou hast given me enough, but it had been better to have aided me more speedily in my struggle with this Hamako, who had well nigh taken my life in his frenzy." "By my faith," said the knight, "I did somewhat fail, was somewhat tardy in rendering thee instant help. But the strangeness of the assailant, the suddenness of the scene, it was as if thy wild and wicked lay had raised the devil among us, and such was my confusion that 2 or 3 minutes elapsed ere I could take my weapon." "Thou art but a cold and considerate friend," said the Saracen, "and, had the Hamako been one grain more frantic, thy companion had been slain by thy side, to thy eternal dishonour, without thy stirring a finger in his aid, although thou satest by, mounted and in arms." "By my word, Saracen," said the Christian, "if thou wilt have it in plain terms, I thought that strange figure was the devil, and being of thy lineage, I knew not what family secret you might be communicating to each other, as you lay lovingly rolling together on the sand." "Thy gib is no answer, brother Kenneth," said the Saracen; "for know that had my assailant been in very deed the Prince of Darkness, thou wert bound not the less to enter into combat with him in thy comrade's behalf. Know also that whatever there may be of foul or of fiendish about the Hamako belongs more to your lineage than to mine, this Hamako being, in truth, the anchorite whom thou art come hither to visit." "This?" said Sir Kenneth, looking at the athletic yet wasted figure before him. "This? Thou mockest, Saracen. This cannot be the venerable Theodorick." "Ask himself, if thou wilt not believe me," answered Sheerkohf; and ere the words had left his mouth, the hermit gave evidence in his own behalf. "I am Theodorick of Engaddi," he said. "I am the walker of the desert. I am friend of the cross, and flail of all infidels, heretics, and devil worshippers. Avoid ye, avoid ye! Down with Mahound, Termagaunt, and all their adherents!" So saying, he pulled from under his shaggy garment a sort of flail or jointed club, bound with iron, which he brandished round his head with singular dexterity. "Thou seest thy saint," said the Saracen, laughing for the first time at the unmitigated astonishment with which Sir Kenneth looked on the wild gestures and heard the wayward mutterings of Theodorick, who, after swinging his flail in every direction, apparently quite recklessly whether it encountered the head of either of his companions, finally showed his own strength, and the soundness of the weapon, by striking into fragments a large stone which lay near him. "This is a madman," said Sir Kenneth. "Not the worse, saint," returned the Moslem, speaking according to the well known Eastern belief, that madmen are under the influence of immediate inspiration. "Know, Christian, that when one eye is extinguished, the other becomes more keen; when one hand is cut off, the other becomes more powerful. So, when our reason in human things is disturbed or destroyed, our view heavenward becomes more acute and perfect." Here the voice of the Saracen was drowned in that of the hermit.